Unseen wounds, anxiety, and the biological impact of trauma. The second element that we investigate relating to PTSD is anxiety. Trauma can profoundly affect the brain, particularly in areas crucial for emotional processing and regulation. The experience of trauma can lead to significant changes in how the brain functions, influencing an individual's emotional response, memory, and behavior. Understanding these changes through the lens of safety is essential for considering the functional behaviors and determine the most effective intervention for managing emotional response. The amygdala, a critical region of the brain responsible for processing emotions and information and detecting threats, often become hyperactive in individuals who have experienced trauma. This hyperactivity leads to an exaggerated fear response and a heightened anxiety, as the amygdala continues to signal danger in the relatively safe situations. This behavior is rooted in the brain's survival mechanism, keeping the individual alert to potential threats even when the actual danger has passed. As a result, the nervous system remains in a state of heightened alert, which can lead to a chronic anxiety and significant difficulties in forming and maintaining relationships. Trauma also impacts the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for regulating emotions and making decisions. Trauma can decrease activity in this area, impairing the individual's ability to regulate emotions and make sound decisions. When the prefrontal cortex is compromised, top down approaches to emotional regulation, such as cognitive strategies that involve reappraisal or reframing, becomes less effective. This impairment leaves the individual more dependent on bottom up approaches, which are based on physiological and sensory interventions to manage emotional responses. The hippocampus, which plays a crucial role in memory processing, is another area of the brain affected by trauma. Traumatic experiences can cause difficulties in remembering certain aspects of events, leading to flashbacks and intrusive memories. These memory-related symptoms are often triggered by specific cues or reminders, which can activate the amygdala and lead to a heightened state of arousal. In such cases, bottom-up approaches to emotional regulation, which focuses on altering physiological states, may be particularly effective in managing the intense emotional response triggered by these memories. Understanding the interplay between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex in the context of trauma is crucial for developing effective therapeutic approaches. The amygdala, which is responsible for processing emotions and detecting threats, can be dysregulated due to trauma. This dysregulation can manifest in two ways: hyperactivity or hypoactivity. While the amygdala is overactive, it floods the nervous system with signals of danger, causing the prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and decision making, to become overwhelmed. In this state, the prefrontal cortex shifts from heightened safety seeking mode, losing its ability to analyze information rationally and making thoughtful decisions. On the other hand, when the amygdala is underactive, it creates a state of freeze or hypoarousal. In this case, the prefrontal cortex is effectively shut down and unable to interpret cues from the body accurately. The individual may feel emotionally numb or detached as their body remains frozen in a survival response. Without recognizing how a specific trigger is impacting the nervous system, whether by over arousing it or causing it to shut down, the therapist may inadvertently choose interventions that do not align with the client's need in the moment. This can slow the recovery process and hinder emotional regulation. The direct correlation between the dysregulation of the amygdala and the impaired function of the prefrontal cortex makes it essential for therapists to assess the state of the nervous system during therapy. By doing so, they can adjust their approach accordingly, either calming the overactive nervous system and helping to awaken it, a hypoactive one, allowing the client to engage more effectively in the healing process. In a hypo response, when the nervous system is underactive and frozen, a bottom-up approach is essential. This strategy focuses on alternately altering the physiological and sensory experience and underlying emotional response, which are crucial when the prefrontal cortex is disengaged due to trauma-induced shutdowns. In such cases, the body is not receiving or interpreting cues properly, and the individual may feel numb or detached. Bottom-up interventions like deep breathing, mindfulness, or physical exercise can help reawaken the body's connection to safety by regulating physiological arousal. For example, deep breathing slows the heart rate down, bringing the nervous system out of its frozen state and allowing the individual to begin re-engaging with their environment. These approaches work by calming by calming the body first, which in turn helps the mind start processing emotions more effectively. In contrast, during a hyper response, when a nervous system is overactive and is a state of heightened arousal, a top-down approach becomes more effective. In this state, the prefrontal cortex is overwhelmed by a flood of danger signals from the amygdala, leading to intense safety-seeking behaviors and reduced capacity for rational thought. Top-down interventions focus on cognitive strategies to re-engage the prefrontal cortex and help the individual regain control over their emotional responses. For instance, by reframing a stressful situation, such as viewing a challenge as an opportunity for growth than rather a potential for failure, an individual can reduce their anxiety and regain perspective. This cognitive reappraisal requires an active prefrontal cortex and helps shift focus from immediate emotional response to a more logical, thoughtful problem solving. By understanding whether the individual is experiencing a hypo or hyper response, therapists can tailor their interventions accordingly, using bottom-up strategies to regulate underactive nervous system and top-down strategies to calm the overactive ones. This balance is essential for helping trauma survivors regain control of their emotional and cognitive responses. The ultimate goal in addressing trauma to create equilibrium between the cognitive, the way the mind thinks, and the somatic, the way the body feels, with the external reality of the world. Achieving this balance often requires choosing between top-down and bottom-up approaches, depending on the specific circumstances and triggers an individual faces. For instance, when someone feels overwhelmed by physiological symptoms of anxiety, such as a racing heartbeat or shallow breathing, a bottom intervention may be more effective. This could involve grounding techniques or sensory modulation to calm the body's stress response, aligning the physical state with the external environment. Conversely, when negative thought patterns or catastrophic thinking can drive emotional response, a top-down approach might be more suitable. This method involves a cognitive strategy such as a reprisal or a reframing to adjust the mental interpretation events, thereby helping the mind align with the reality. Behavior in response to trauma is intricately linked to the individual's biological response to perceived threats. Both top-down and bottom-up approaches aim to restore a sense of safety by bringing the mind and the body into harmony with the external world. The interventions must be tailored to specific circumstances and triggers an individual's encounter. The most effective approach often combines both strategies, addressing the mind and body simultaneously. This dual focus helps the individual navigate their triggers, facilitating a journey towards healing that integrates cognitive and somatic experiences with the real world, making the process feel both safe and manageable. Integrating the trauma narrative, understanding avoidance, anxiety, and biological response in John's story. John's story, as we've begun to explore, reveals a man who, on the surface, has achieved everything society deems successful. He reached the pinnacle of his field, a place where many would find satisfaction and contentment. But for John, it was never a nudge. Each success, each accolade was just another shiny object, another distraction for a deep-seated pain and shame that had followed from his childhood. The more he achieved, the more he strove, not out of ambition alone, but out of a desperate need to keep the darkness at bay. John's success was not merely a product of hard work and intelligence. It was also deeply rooted in hypervigilance and the fawning response, both of which have been integrated in him as a survival mechanism from his early experience of interpersonal trauma. His hypervigilance allowed him to read a room with uncanny precision, to anticipate the needs and moods of others, and to navigate complex social and business landscapes with ease. The heightened state of alertness, while exhausted, became one of his most valuable tools in the business world. It became an edge, but it also kept him in a constant state of readiness, always scanning for threats, always preparing for the worst. The fawning response, another byproduct of his trauma, manifested in his ability to charm and appease those around him. John knew how to make people feel at ease, how to say the right thing, how to present himself as exactly what they wanted him to be. This made him highly effective in negotiating and relationship building, essential skills for businessmen. But this ability to fawn, to mold himself to others' expectations, came at a cost. It often left him feeling disconnected from his own needs and desires, further reinforcing his sense of defectiveness and belief that his worth was tied to his ability to please others. As he climbed higher and higher in his career, the sense of accomplishment that once came with his achievements began to wane. The thrill of sealing a big deal, the satisfaction of outmaneuvering a competitor. These victories that had once filled the void within him were no longer enough. The shiny object had served as a distraction for so long were losing their luster. And as they did, the heaviness of the sense of defectiveness, monster within him, had tried so hard to suppress, began to invade his mind more and more. This is the paradox of John's success. The more he accomplished, the less satisfied he became. What once provided a sense of control and validation now felt hollow, leaving him increasingly vulnerable to the very feelings of worthlessness he had been running from all his life. The monster of shame, the deep-rooted belief that was fundamentally flawed because of his past, grew stronger as his achievements lost the power to distract him from it. John's relentless pursuit of success was never about the success itself. It was about the avoidance of pain. But as he reached the pinnacle of his career, the distraction became less effective and the avoidance less possible. The shiny objects that once served him so well were failing to keep the darkness at bay, and the unresolved trauma of his past was demanding to be addressed. His hypervigilance, once a tool for success, became a source of constant anxiety. His fawning, once a strategy for building alliance, started to feel like a betrayal of his true self. The very mechanisms that had helped him survive and succeed were now contributing to his unraveling. In therapy, this realization was a turning point. John had to confront the truth of his achievement. While impressive, were not enough to silence the monster within. The sense of defectiveness, the shame that had driven so much out of his life, was not something he could outrun or achieve. It was something he had to face head on. The challenge for John was not to recognize this pattern, but in understanding that the path to healing lay not in more success, but embracing the vulnerability he had always feared. It was about moving beyond the shiny object, the distractions, and begin the difficult work of integrating his experience into a coherent narrative of self-acceptance and growth. For John, and for many like him, the journey to healing required a fundamental shift in perspective. It required him to stop looking outward for validation and start looking inward for understanding. It required him to see that the monster within was not something to be feared or avoided, but something to be understood and integrated. Only then could he begin to find the peace and satisfaction that had eluded him for so long.